With the stroke of a pen, India's Prime Minister stripped Kashmir of its autonomy, promising to restore its past glory. But 4 weeks on, the disputed territory is still cut off from the rest of the world. Is Modi gambling on Kashmir and on Indian democracy? Hello and welcome to Bigger Than Five with me, Rida Fakhri. It has been more than 4 weeks since India's decision to revoke the decades-old special status of Jammu and Kashmir by rescinding Article 370 of the Constitution, which granted the disputed territory limited autonomy since 1947. Ahead of its decision, the Indian government deployed thousands of troops to the region, which is already one of the most densely militarized areas in the world. Local officials say up to 4,000 Kashmiris, including business leaders, human rights defenders, and elected representatives, have since been arrested. Some have reportedly been tortured. The government denies these allegations and insists that the restrictions are necessary to maintain law and order and to prevent violence. Some protests in the Kashmir Valley have turned violent, with many Kashmiris anxious that Delhi's unilateral move is intended to change the demographics of the state from majority Muslim to majority Hindu. In just a few moments, we'll be speaking with BJP spokesperson Shazia Ilmi about her government's clampdown. But first, we get the view from Kashmiris living in Pakistan-administered Kashmir.
तो मेरा नाम चौधरी मुश्ताक है, मेरा डिस्ट्रिक्ट कुपवाड़ा है, मकबूजा जम्मू कश्मीर से मेरा ताल्लुक है। तो यहाँ बहुत सारे लोग आए क्योंकि उस वक्त मकबूजा जम्मू कश्मीर के हालात इसी तरह जिस तरह आज हैं, तो 90 के बाद हालात बहुत ज़्यादा ख़राब। तो मेरे वालिद और मेरे दो सगे भाई, मेरे भाई उस वक्त श्रीनगर में पढ़ते थे, उन्हें सूझबूझ भी थी, सारी चीज़ें थी, समझते थे कि ये तारीख क्या सूरत हाल है। तो उन्हें गिरफ्तार किया गया। मेरे भाई पहले 4 साल जेल में रहे, उसके बाद मेरे वालिद साहब को गिरफ्तार किया गया। फिर जब वो दोनों छोड़े, फिर दोनों भाइयों को गिरफ्तार किया और वालिद साहब को गिरफ्तार किया। तो मैं समझता हूँ इस वक्त दुनिया को आगे बढ़ के कश्मीर की मदद करनी चाहिए। क्या कर रही है हमारी कौमी मुत्तहिदा, क्या कर रही है हमारी OIC, वो किस वक्त का इंतज़ार करें जब सारे कश्मीरी ख़त्म हो जाएंगे। लेकिन बहुत अफसोस से कहना पड़ता है, जिस तरह आज सूरत हाल है जम्मू कश्मीर में, आज 21 दिन से बिल्कुल ब्लैक आउट है। हमारा वहाँ किसी से रब्ता नहीं है। मुझे 2 तारीख को मेरे घर से मुझे पैगाम आया था, मैसेज भी मेरे पास है कि बेटे कोई पता नहीं है, अब भी हम जिंदा होंगे, आपसे बात करेंगे या नहीं करेंगे। तो ये हमारी आखिरी मैसेज है, यहाँ पता नहीं क्या होने वाला है।
ये हुआ कि बॉर्डर पे उनको एक ये भी है कि यार उन्होंने लगाए माइन, बहुत ज़्यादा बारूदी सुरंगें इतनी बिछाई हैं कि बंदा सोच भी नहीं सकता। हम ट्रेन थे तो जब बॉर्डर क्रॉस की तो रास्ते में माइन थे, वो एक माइन पे मैं भी बल्कि आ गया और माइन की ज़ात में। मेरी फैमिली, मेरे कज़न हैं, मामूज़ात हैं और उसके बाद खालूज़ात हैं। ये जो पिछले तकरीबन 20 दिन 22 पहले उनके साथ बात हुई, लेकिन उसके फ़ौरन बाद ही मैंने व्हाट्सएप पे कुछ ऑडियोज़ वगैरह भेजी, लेकिन उनका कोई उसके बाद जवाब नहीं आया। फिर मैंने लाइन हैंड से भी कॉल की। अब खुद अंदाज़ा करें कि अंदर कितना जुल्म हुआ है या हो रहा है, और अभी भी हमें ये अंदाज़ा नहीं है कि कितने लोग शहीद हुए हैं।
हम बछोड़े में पै गए, हमें हिजरत हो गई है, आप हमसे छूट कर दुनिया से चले गए, हम भी दुनिया से चले जाएंगे। आज़ाद कश्मीर में आप हमसे नहीं मिलेंगे, हम आपसे नहीं मिल सकते हैं। ये हम पर मतलब कि हो गया है, कानून लगा हुआ है। मोदी तो यही तो उसके दिल में है कि ये मुसलमानों को मतलब इंडिया में ये कानून लाजम करें, पहले तो कानून करें, आस्ते आस्ते मैं आन का अपने लोगों को यहाँ मतलब जगहों में क्या करूँ, बसाऊँ, इधर से मतलब जुल्म करूँ, मुसलमानों पर ख़त्म करूँ, उनकी आँखों की लो ख़त्म करूँ, इधर से मुसलमान कटते जाएँ, उधर से हमारे हिंदू आकर कश्मीर में क्या करें बसें। जब हमारी हिंदू बस कर ज़्यादा हो जाएंगे तो कश्मीरियों का खुद यहाँ से ख़ात्मा हो जाएगा, कश्मीर हमारी हो जाएगी, ये तो उसने सोच करके ये बात की है। ये तो हम नहीं मानते हैं किसी कीमत। हमारे कश्मीरी कभी भी नहीं मानेंगे। अगर कोई भी आकर जगह ख़रीदेगा तो जगह ख़रीदने पर वहाँ लाजमन झगड़ा होगा हमारी कश्मीर की। तो मैं इन मुसलमानों पर जुल्म करूँगा, ये आपका कभी हिंदू करने मोदी का नहीं चलेगा। किस मुल्क के साथ मतलब रहते हैं कि आप किस बादशाह के साथ रहने, आप किस तरीके नाल आपकी ज़िंदगी इसके बाद निकाल सकते हैं। कश्मीरी मुंह से बोलेंगे।
That was the reaction from Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Well, joining us now to discuss the latest in Indian-administered Kashmir is Shazia Ilmi, spokesperson for India's ruling party, the BJP. She's also the vice president of BJP Delhi. Shazia Ilmi, the situation in Kashmir, as you well know, has been described as a complete siege, a military curfew with thousands of people confined to their homes, perhaps even millions of people confined to their homes, a complete communications blackout, a media lockdown. 2,000 to 4,000 people, it's been reported, detained, many of them local politicians, as well as young children. Can you clarify the situation for us and tell us how your government justifies these measures?
So first of all, Jammu and Kashmir is a state of India and remains an integral part of India. Article 370, which gave a special status to Kashmiri citizens of Jammu and Kashmir, has been abrogated. When it became a part of the Indian Constitution, it was seen as a temporary provision. However, there was no political sustainability of this provision in the political framework as it panned out 70 years later. Since the 90s, Kashmir has been, the entire area, and especially the valley of Srinagar, has been actually taken over by militants of all shades. So now the truth is out there, and this false propaganda won't work. Yes, it is true that some political leaders and local leaders have been detained, but that is only for now. And for months on end, there are curfews. The valley is seized by the armed forces because of violence. And that is the reason why they have to be contained, because they are close to some of the separatists who in turn create unrest. So this is being done to protect the Kashmiri citizens, and there is no media blackout.
Shazia Ilmi, you call
Yes.
it false propaganda, but in fact many human rights organizations, including Human Rights
Yes,
Watch,
yes.
says that the government's efforts to silence critics and independent media suggest that it has plenty to hide. If the situation is as you depicted, why not allow third-party members to come in and see for themselves what is going on in Kashmir?
You know, there are two choices for the Indian government, which is to lift restrictions and allow bloodshed to take place and take accountability for loss of lives. And second is to have restrictions, to make sure citizens are safe, that militants and terrorists, rather, not militants, take over. And that is, I think that is a sensible step by the government to make sure that Kashmiri lives are not done asunder by these attacks from across Pakistan. Pakistan is totally beleaguered now. All the Muslim nations that they have gone running to have also supported India. And all the foreign journalists and media and the human rights organization that you seem to be quoting at this point of time and citing have not been able to produce a shred of evidence about the so-called atrocities by the Indian army.
What is it perhaps because you haven't allowed opposition politicians or human rights organizations to come in?
Let me finish saying what I'm saying. They are Kashmiris who have been killed. They're Kashmiri Muslims. So if Pakistan is trying to make it about Hindus and Muslims, it is totally wrong. The Ladakh, which is an important part of Jammu and Kashmir, is actually welcoming the decision, because all the funds that were being given to this state of Jammu and Kashmir were siphoned off by these corrupt politicians who are now really upset. There are two political families.
You talk about
Pakistani
violence,
separatists.
but as you know, human rights activists have been accusing your own government of brutality, of suppressing Kashmiris' right to demonstrate and to show the world their suffering. If that isn't the case, why then Has your government sent tens of thousands of troops to an
Yeah, but
already
the
heavily
human rights
militarized zone?
activists, the same human rights
Why are you
activists
detaining
who are hailed by the
thousands
Western
of
media
political
have
activists and
not
young
been able to
children?
give
Can you
any
address this
evidence?
point? Can you address the point of why it is that your government has found it okay to detain thousands of people, if indeed the situation is the way you depict it?
I don't agree with any of what you're saying, because you have not been able to produce a shred of evidence about the so-called atrocities that you talk about. Yes, people have been detained, and very often in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, in the valley itself, there has been curfew because of terrorist activities. So it is really not the first time. So if some activists who seem to have a problem with the Modi government and who dance to the tune of the Pakistani establishment have a problem with the government taking charge and being responsible for the Kashmiris, not allowing the terrorists to take over or terror backers to take over, I think it's a very good thing.
Let me ask you about the political motivations behind this unilateral and quite heavy-handed approach and decision by the Prime Minister, Modi, and the BJP party. Obviously, they've been campaigning on this for a very long time.
When you say unilateral,
there are also legal questions about the validity of this decision. Can you address those?
Kashmir is a part of India. Obviously, it is going to be unilateral.
So why then?
It is our country, it is our state, it is our right.
If this decision is so legally sound, why then has the Supreme Court agreed to look at several challenges that are brought before it by Kashmiris beginning in October?
When the petition was heard in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said very clearly that we leave it to the Indian authorities and we'll review it after 14 days. This is deemed normal and fit in the light of what has happened. We do not want the terrorists from Pakistan who have influenced the separatists and the local leadership to create unrest because a section of Pakistani-backed leaders are benefited by this by 370. I'm an Indian Muslim, and there are more Muslims in India than there are in Pakistan.
That doesn't make the decisions of your government any less egregious.
Ma'am, I need to inform you. You do not know this. You're clearly brainwashed and you're not well informed. But I need
this is about the legal basis on which India, your government, Prime Minister Modi's government, has decided to do unilaterally, imposing its decision on the people of Kashmir without warning, without consultation, against the ruling of the Supreme Court back in April 2018. Hold on, let me finish.
I don't understand. What do you
Article
mean by the term
70, according to the Supreme Court, had detained
You don't seem to know your
permanency.
facts. We are a sovereign country. We are a sovereign country, my dear friend. India is a sovereign nation. We have a parliament. We have a prime minister. We have democracy in our country. We are not like Pakistan, where judges are put behind bars, where the two former prime ministers and presidents are being locked up, where the media houses are bullied. We have a very robust press, complete freedom of expression, and a parliament that functions.
Why then are you imposing? Why then is the Indian democracy imposing its will on the people of Kashmir against the rulings of the Supreme Court in a way that goes against the will of the people?
So people of Ladakh who are Buddhist, and people of Jammu who are Hindus, and many local Kashmiris who are Muslims have welcomed this totally, because they're sick and tired of corruption. They're sick and tired of terrorism. They want development in their state. They want jobs.
The very people you purport to be helping out, have you allowed them a say in this whole situation? You've locked up their political leaders. You've not allowed them to go out and demonstrate.
So the Kashmiris that you are talking about, who are upset and offended, are the Kashmiris who are part of the political class, who actually are sympathetic and are on the payrolls of the Hurriyat, who are in turn governed by the military establishment, who do not allow elections to happen, who want only the stone pelters to take over, who do not want development to take place, who do not want hospitals and technology and institutes to prosper. They are those people who benefit from this special status.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. That was Shazia Ilmi, spokesperson for India's ruling BJP. The Himalayan region of Jammu and Kashmir has been hotly contested between India and Pakistan ever since the two countries' independence from British colonial rule. They have fought 2 wars over the territory, and their relationship continues to be marred by their ongoing dispute. So why has India decided now to change the status quo and repeal 2 key articles of its constitution? As Haidari explains.
Jammu and Kashmir's special status is in the temporary, transitional and special provisions of the Constitution of India. Article 370 came into effect in 1949. It granted special status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir and autonomy over its own internal affairs. Delhi retained control over foreign affairs, communications, and the military. Article 370 gave Jammu and Kashmir the autonomy to have its own constitution, flag, and the freedom to legislate laws relating to fundamental rights like residency, citizenship, and ownership of property and land. Article 35A was introduced in 1954. It allowed local legislator in Indian-administered Kashmir to define permanent residence and prevent outsiders from permanently settling, buying land, holding local government jobs, or winning local education scholarships. Repealing these provisions means all provisions of the Indian constitutions will now be applicable to Jammu and Kashmir. It also means that out-of-state Indians will be able to buy property in Indian-administered Kashmir. Kashmiris fear this could lead to an influx of Hindu immigration and could significantly alter the state's demographics from majority Muslim to majority Hindu. Following the presidential order to revoke Jammu and Kashmir's special status, the Indian Parliament passed the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act. It would divide the state into 2 territories, Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Union Territory of Ladakh. The Reorganization Act will come into effect on October 31st, 2019.
Well, for more now on the impact of India's decision to revoke Articles 370 and 35A, I'm joined by Mona Ban, Professor of Anthropology at Syracuse University, and Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center. Professor Ban, how do you respond to the Indian government's arguments that Article 370 was always intended to be a temporary affair?
It was supposed to be a temporary affair only until the voice of the people was heard through a plebiscite. And that plebiscite did not happen. The only other body that could have abrogated the Articles 370 and 35A was the Constituent Assembly, which was dissolved in 1957. And because it was dissolved in 1957, Article 370 therefore becomes a permanent provision mandating the relationship between India and Kashmir.
And there have been questions about the legality of this move. The Supreme Court of India ruling that this indeed did attain a level of permanency. That is not something that Indian officials agree with, though.
Absolutely. So that was last year when the Supreme Court came out with its decision to proclaim Article 370 as a permanent provision. But other than that, other than what the Indian government invokes is this sort of parliamentary proceedings, right, where the decision was taken in haste. The decision was taken when Kashmir was under, and continues to be, of course, under a severe clampdown. And I'm completely aghast at how India tries to defend its democracy when in fact what it's trying to do is shoving this decision down people's throats in Kashmir without any form of credible representation from the people of Kashmir.
No representation. Kashmiris, you'll hear, will say, some of them at least, that they had absolutely no say in this. There's been a clampdown, no right to protest for the most part. As an outside observer, though, Michael Kugelman, how do you see the situation? What kind of first-hand accounts are you hearing and getting from Kashmiris themselves?
Well, it's so striking that my friends and contacts on the ground in Kashmir, I just have not been able to make contact with them. There was one case, a friend of mine who I was able to speak with a few weeks ago only because they had been able to get into New Delhi for the day where they're able to communicate. And I think, based on those that I've spoken to that have been there and that have left, it's the communication blackout that is most significant.
And so what do you make of that, though? Because Indian officials often say that this is in the interest of Kashmiris and that the decision is widely welcomed. Why then this communications lockdown, if it is?
Well, what the Indians would say is that they want to prevent those that would be trying to make trouble. They don't want that to happen by trying to use the communications to rally people and get them on the streets and that type of thing.
Mona Ban, what about the justification that Indian officials give?
Right, so one thing we do have to understand is the colonial strategy at work here, where you're trying to tell people, we're going to lock you up, we're going to incarcerate you. There are nighttime raids going on right now where they're literally arresting and detaining children too, right? There was a fact-finding report that was just released a couple of weeks ago with some very gruesome details of how this clampdown, this communication clampdown, is literally not letting people assess, the damage on the ground.
Have you been able to speak to anyone to ascertain?
Yes, I have spoken to a few people. One of them was in Delhi, a friend of mine, who basically just laid it out for me in the goriest detail what's been happening on the streets in Kashmir. So you might not see a lot of military presence, for example, on the streets. That's because nighttime raids have inflicted and infused a sense of dread and deep fear among people.
Michael Kugelman, anyone listening to Prime Minister Modi's campaign speeches, looking at the situation closely, looking at the influx of Indian troops into the region in the days leading up to the 5th of August decision, would have known there was something going on. What was, in your mind, the key motivation for Modi to act now, and what is the end game?
Yeah, well, I think it's an important point here that this is not too much of a surprise that the Modi government made this move, because it had been telegraphing its intention to revoke Article 370 for a number of years. Several factors at play. One, I think, is President Donald Trump appearing to offer, when Prime Minister Imran Khan was in Washington, to mediate the Kashmir dispute. I think that may have spooked India a bit, and it had an opportunity or an excuse to say, well, look, we're going to make this move, we're going to formally integrate Kashmir into the Indian Union, so there's no longer a dispute to mediate. The other factor is political. In India, I think that the BJP wanted to make a move early in its second term that it knew would be quite popular among its rank and file, and also across India on the whole, because even a fair amount of the political opposition in India has supported this move. And I think the government knows that eventually it's going to have to tackle a jobs crisis, economic reform. Those are areas that could be unpopular, could cause it some political trouble. So why not make this big bang move right now that it knew would be popular to insulate itself from that blowback?
A move that would be popular with the nationalist base of Prime Minister Modi,
Right.
but some people are likening the situation and the approach with the Israeli government's decision to annex the West Bank and indeed to pursue settlement policies that change the demographics of the region. To what extent do you see a similarity between the two approaches?
A strong similarity for sure, because with the removal of 35A, we had to recognize also that Article 370 had literally been emptied of its core meaning for Kashmiris. But 35A, which guaranteed people access to land, Kashmiris access to land and citizenship, with its revocation, what it of course opens the floodgates to is Indian quote-unquote Hindu investments in the only Muslim majority state, disputed state in India. So yes, of course, people are extremely worried. In fact, I was just reading how the Maharashtrian government has already bought land in Pahalgam and in Ladakh now to build resorts. So this fear, of course, is not at all unfounded, because this is exactly what the right-wing strategy of the RSS-backed BJP government has been all along, is to Hinduize the region.
So then, Michael, where does all this leave India's repeated claims to be the world's oldest and largest democracy?
Well, I think its image has taken a bit of a hit. I mean, it's almost seems strange right now just to trumpet India as the world's largest democracy. Just the way that they carried out this move, as we discussed, was highly undemocratic. To keep people in the dark, literally, to make a move unilaterally, to integrate a region that was claimed by Pakistan into India proper. I don't see that as a very democratic thing to do.
A quick thing to add to what Michael just said, we do want to recognize, right, that Indian democracy did not exist in any form or shape for Kashmiris. And this has been going on for the last 70 years now, where democracy in Kashmir has always meant the installation of puppet governments by India, and that's ended.
What about the need for international pressure from the international community, from the UN Security Council, which took up the issue recently, but didn't do very much beyond expressing its usual deep concern? How important will it be for the United States and others to step in, to put some pressure, instead of leaving this issue to both countries to sort out among themselves? To you, Mona Ban, first.
Well, for one, I think Kashmiris are important stakeholders, the only significant stakeholders in this, and they don't believe that a bilateral resolution is possible. It's not happened in the last 70 years. So why would Kashmiris believe that it's going to happen now? And therefore, they are relying on the international community, on the United Nations Security Council in particular, to come up with a stronger statement, to step in, to uphold its promise of a plebiscite to the Kashmiri people.
Well, I think the more India feels it's not going to be pressured, it'll be emboldened, so to speak, to do even more. And it is a huge obstacle for the international community, given that so much of the world views India as a key strategic partner and as a country that provides key markets. So in other words, I think there's a desire on the part of the international community not to rock the boat when it comes to the Kashmir issue, not wanting to alienate India. That's going to continue to be a big obstacle in the weeks and months ahead.
Michael Kugelman and Mona Ban, thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you so much.
Thank you.
And so while Prime Minister Modi's move may be a new, largely unchallenged reality, the old feud between India and Pakistan continues with one harsh fact. The people of Kashmir are being denied their fundamental right to self-determination in accordance with the 1948 UN Security Council call for a referendum. The fear now is that if new facts on the ground are allowed to take shape, the overdue referendum may become even more elusive, paving the way for yet more violence and repression. From me, Rida Fakhri, and all the team here in Washington, thanks for watching. See you next time.